Hello amazing humans, and a massive welcome to the channel. Seriously, wherever you are in the world right now, thank you for hitting play. Before we dive deep into today's fascinating topic, sending you all the biggest virtual high fives and wishing you nothing but fantastic health and positive energy. Okay, let's get into it. Picture this. Hundreds of years after the mighty Roman Empire falls, Europe plunges into darkness. Barbarians run wild, knowledge vanishes, people forget how to build, art dies, and everyone just huddles in fear waiting for the world to end. That's the classic image of the Dark Ages, right? It's a story told in textbooks, movies, and even casual conversation. But what if I told you that label, the Dark Ages, is one of history's biggest, most persistent oversimplifications, maybe even a straight-up myth we desperately need to rethink? Stick with me, because we're about to shine a very bright light on what was actually happening in Europe between roughly 500 and 1000 AD, and it's way more complex, surprising, and frankly, brighter than you've probably been led to believe. So, first things first, where did this gloomy term even come from? Blame it on some very smart, very passionate guys living much later, during the Italian Renaissance, people like Petrarch. Looking back at the Roman Empire, its grand architecture, its philosophers like Cicero, its poets, they saw their own time as a glorious rebirth, renaissance of that classical light. And the messy centuries sandwiched between the fall of Rome and their own glorious era? Well, to them, it looked like a big, dark void where all that Roman goodness got lost. They basically labeled it dark because they couldn't see much of the classical world they loved shining through. It was less about what actually happened during those centuries and more about their own perspective looking backwards. Think of it like judging your grandparents' teenage years solely by the fact they didn't have smartphones. You'd miss the whole picture. Calling it dark implies a total collapse, a standstill, a period of pure ignorance and violence. And while, yes, the collapse of the massive, centralized Roman state caused huge disruptions, trade networks shriveled, cities emptied in many places, literacy rates definitely dropped outside specific groups, and there was plenty of conflict, that's far from the whole story. It wasn't a universal blackout across the entire continent for 500 straight years. Let's talk about the supposed death of knowledge. Did people just forget how to read and write? Nope. While large-scale, state-funded Roman-style schools faded, the flame of learning didn't go out. Where did it keep burning? Often fiercely bright. Inside monasteries. Seriously, these religious communities became the unexpected powerhouses of preservation and even innovation. Monks, tucked away in places like Ireland, England, Italy, and modern-day Germany, dedicated their lives to painstakingly copying manuscripts. Not just the Bible, though that was central, but also works by Roman authors, Greek philosophy, often preserved thanks to connections with the Byzantine Empire in the East, histories, scientific texts, and writings by early church thinkers. Imagine the dedication, writing by candlelight, day after day, preserving Plato, Virgil, medical knowledge, agricultural techniques. Without these monks, we might have lost huge chunks of the ancient world forever. That's not darkness, that's actively fighting against forgetting. And it wasn't just copying. Monks wrote their own histories, like the Venerable Bede in England, whose work is still crucial for understanding early English history. They composed beautiful music, Gregorian chant. Anyone developed new artistic styles in their illuminated manuscripts. Those incredibly detailed, colorful book decorations are stunning art, not primitive doodles, and even dabbled in science, figuring out better ways to tell time with complex water clocks or studying the stars for the church calendar. Then there's the idea that everyone lived in miserable hovels and forgot how to build anything decent. Again, not entirely true. While the massive, stone public works projects like aqueducts and amphitheaters largely stopped being built in Western Europe, construction didn't vanish. People adapted. They built impressive timber structures, great feats of engineering in their own right, even if the wood didn't always survive the centuries like stone does. Look at the incredible Viking longships. Those weren't built by ignorant savages, they were masterpieces of naval architecture, allowing exploration, trade, and yes, raiding, across vast distances. And stone building made a comeback much earlier than people think. Charlemagne, that famous king-crowned emperor in 800 AD, initiated a massive building program. His palace chapel at Aachen, inspired by Roman and Byzantine churches, is a magnificent stone structure showing sophisticated architectural skill. Across Europe, beautiful stone churches and monasteries were being built centuries before the famous Gothic cathedrals. People were innovating too. Ever heard of the heavy plow? That revolutionary farming tool, developed during this period, allowed Europeans to cultivate the dense, fertile soils of Northern Europe much more effectively, leading to better harvests and supporting growing populations. Then there's the horse collar. Sounds simple, right? But this invention, replacing the old yoke that choked horses, allowed them to pull plows and carts far more powerfully than oxen, dramatically boosting agricultural productivity and transportation. This isn't technological stagnation, it's adaptation and crucial innovation born from necessity. Speaking of Charlemagne, his reign is a massive clue that this era wasn't uniformly dark. He wasn't just a warrior king, he actively promoted what historians now call the Carolingian Renaissance. He gathered scholars from all over his empire and beyond, from Italy, Spain, England, Ireland, to his court. These scholars worked to standardize Latin, which had been evolving into various local dialects, improve handwriting to make books clearer and easier to read, developing the beautiful Carolingian minuscule script, the basis of our lowercase letters today, copy ancient texts like crazy, and establish schools, not just for monks, but aiming for education even for some lay people at court and in cathedral towns. Charlemagne himself, famously, tried hard to learn to read and write as an adult, showing the value he placed on learning. This was a deliberate, empire-wide effort to revive learning and culture. Does that sound like a period of utter intellectual darkness? Not really. It shows a conscious effort to rebuild and reconnect with knowledge. Now, let's zoom out beyond the borders of what was becoming Europe. The label Dark Ages is overwhelmingly applied to Western Europe. But what about the glittering Byzantine Empire centered on Constantinople? It was going strong, preserving Roman law, Greek philosophy, and advanced engineering, acting as a crucial bridge between East and West. Their capital was a dazzling metropolis of wealth, learning, and sophisticated diplomacy, definitely not living through any dark age. And then there's the incredible rise of the Islamic caliphates during this exact same period. While Western Europe was reorganizing, centers like Baghdad, Cordoba, and Cairo became global powerhouses of science, mathematics, medicine, astronomy, and philosophy. Islamic scholars didn't just preserve ancient Greek and Roman knowledge, they expanded it enormously, making groundbreaking discoveries in algebra, optics, surgery, chemistry, alchemy, and more. They built vast libraries, established advanced hospitals, and translated works from Greek, Persian, and Sanskrit into Arabic, and later into Latin, eventually feeding this knowledge back into Europe. To call the 8th or 9th century globally a Dark Age ignores the blazing beacons of learning and culture flourishing in the East and South. The darkness was a very regional perspective. Life on the ground wasn't just constant war and misery either. Yes, political power was fragmented. Big empires were gone, replaced by smaller kingdoms, duchies, and lordships. This led to local conflicts, raids, and instability, especially in border regions. Powerful local lords, the beginnings of what we'd later call feudalism, offered protection in exchange for service and loyalty. It wasn't an ideal system by modern standards, often harsh and unequal, but it provided a structure for local governance, defense, and agricultural production in the absence of a strong central state like Rome. Communities organized themselves. Farming techniques, like the three-field system, improved over time, leading to better food production. Local markets sprung up. Craftspeople, blacksmiths, potters, weavers, carpenters, continued their trades, developing skills and producing goods. Laws, often based on old Germanic customs mixed with Roman law and Christian principles, were written down and enforced locally. Think of the Anglo-Saxon Doom Book. People married, raised families, celebrated festivals, told stories, sang songs, and practiced their faith. The incredible art of this period, intricate metalwork like the Sutton Hoo treasures, stunning illuminated manuscripts like the Book of Kells, vibrant frescoes in churches, speaks volumes about skill, creativity, and cultural vitality. This isn't the output of a society utterly consumed by darkness and despair. And let's not forget the movement of peoples. This era saw migrations and interactions that reshaped the continent. Angles, Saxons, and Jutes moving into Britain. Franks consolidating power in Gaul, France. Lombards in Italy. Visigoths in Spain. And later, the Vikings exploding out of Scandinavia, not just as raiders, though they definitely were that, but also as traders, explorers who reached North America, and settlers who founded communities from Russia, the Rus, to Ireland, Normandy, and Iceland. The Magyars arriving in the Carpathian Basin. While these movements involved violence and displacement, they also led to cultural mixing, the exchange of ideas, technologies, and languages, laying the foundations for the nations and cultures of modern Europe. This dynamic churn, while disruptive, is a sign of a living, changing world, not a stagnant, dark one. The Viking Age alone, happening squarely within the supposed Dark Ages, was a period of incredible dynamism, exploration, and cultural interaction across vast distances. So, was it all sunshine and progress? Absolutely not. Compared to the height of the Roman Empire, the scale of certain things diminished in Western Europe for a time. Large-scale international trade networks across the Mediterranean shrank significantly, though never vanished completely, due to instability, piracy, and the rise of Islamic powers controlling key routes. Many Roman cities in the West did contract dramatically in size and population. People moved more towards rural life for security and subsistence. Literacy rates were much lower than in Roman times or later medieval periods, concentrated heavily among clergy and a tiny elite. Life was undoubtedly harder, shorter, and more precarious for the average peasant than it had been for many Roman citizens at the empire's peak. Disease, local warfare, and the sheer difficulty of subsistence farming made survival a constant struggle. There were periods of famine and devastating plagues. The political fragmentation meant less large-scale infrastructure and more localized conflict. The period after the Roman collapse was undeniably one of transition, challenge, and often hardship. There were absolutely darker moments, regions, and decades within these centuries. But here's the crucial point: calling the entire period across the whole continent the Dark Ages paints with a ridiculously broad, bleak brush. It ignores the pockets of light, the fierce preservation of knowledge, the vital innovations, the complex political and social developments, the vibrant art and culture, and the dynamic interactions happening across Europe and beyond. It overlooks the flourishing of Byzantium and the Islamic world happening simultaneously. It implies a complete absence of progress or achievement, which simply isn't true. The term itself is a value judgment imposed centuries later by people yearning for a different past. Modern historians overwhelmingly avoid using Dark Ages as a serious label because it's misleading and inaccurate. They prefer terms like Early Middle Ages or Late Antiquity for the earlier part, which are more neutral and descriptive, acknowledging the period as one of significant change, adaptation, and foundation laying, rather than a simple void of darkness. Think of it like this: imagine a forest after a massive fire. The landscape looks devastated, charred, dark compared to the lush greenery before. But look closer. Immediately, life starts returning. Hardy plants push through the ash. Insects buzz. Animals return. New growth, different from the old forest, begins. It's a period of recovery and transformation. The old giants are gone, but the ecosystem is rebuilding, adapting, finding new ways. The early Middle Ages were like that for Western Europe after the fire of the Roman collapse. It wasn't an empty wasteland, it was a time of profound reorganization, where new political structures, new social systems, new cultural expressions, and new technologies were slowly taking root. The seeds planted then, the preserved knowledge in monasteries, the agricultural innovations, the cultural blending, the rise of kingdoms like the Franks, eventually grew into the High Middle Ages with its soaring cathedrals, universities, and renewed trade. You can't have the 12th century Renaissance without the groundwork, however messy, of the centuries before. So, is the Dark Ages a myth? It's more nuanced than a simple yes or no. The label itself is problematic, loaded, and largely rejected by scholars because it distorts reality. The reality was a complex mix of decline in some aspects, preservation in others, innovation in surprising places, hardship for many, and the slow, often difficult, birth of medieval Europe. There were dark elements, violence, instability, loss, but there was also resilience, adaptation, creativity, and continuity. Reducing 500 years of diverse human experience across an entire continent to a single, gloomy adjective does a massive disservice to our understanding of how the world transformed. It wasn't a blank, dark page, it was a complex, messy, challenging, but ultimately vital chapter in the human story, setting the stage for everything that came after. The light never truly went out, it just burned in different places, sometimes hidden, waiting to flare up again. So next time you hear Dark Ages, remember the monks copying Aristotle by candlelight, the farmers inventing the heavy plow, the artisans crafting stunning jewelry, the scholars gathering at Charlemagne's court, and the Vikings navigating vast oceans. That's not darkness. That's humanity, adapting, enduring, and building the future, one difficult, fascinating century at a time. Thanks so much for watching, folks. If this blew your mind a little bit, give that like button a tap, subscribe if you haven't already for more deep dives into misunderstood history, and let me know in the comments, what surprised you the most. Stay curious, stay blessed, and I'll catch you in the next video. Peace out.